Thank you. It's really nice to be here. I haven't been to Indianapolis since I was a young man. My family vacationed. We were actually driving through and had relatives relatively locally, and they wanted a place for the kids to blow off steam. And there was a museum in downtown Indianapolis that we went to, and someone said it was probably in this building. So when I was about 12 or 13 years old, I guess I was standing right here, looking at whatever exhibit it was, driving my parents a little crazy. Thanks for coming out tonight. I know an evening in September is a commitment. We'll make it worth your time. If a dad with 3 kids can do it, we can all do it too. I've got 2 little girls. I have immense respect for you being here tonight. Our mission is to support a model of growth that allows America's cities, towns, and neighborhoods to become financially strong and resilient. Our presentation has 3 main takeaways. I'm going to begin with this and I'm going to end with this. The first, the current path that cities are on is not financially stable. The second, the future for most cities is not going to resemble the recent past. And then third, the main determinant of future prosperity for cities will be the ability of local leaders to transform their communities. I want to start this conversation by having you think about the way we built cities thousands of years ago. These are 2 artist renderings. The one on the left is an ancient city called Ur, the Fertile Crescent, one of the oldest civilizations that's ever been excavated, like 6,000 BC. On the right, of course, is ancient Rome. If you think about the way that these places were laid out, they were laid out around the predominant transportation technology of the day, that, of course, being your 2 feet. Everybody who lived in these places walked everywhere they went. And so the scale of the buildings, the spacing between different types of uses, the way that buildings interrelated with each other, all these things were based around a society of people who walked. Fast forward thousands of years. This is my hometown of Brainerd, Minnesota. I live today what is about 2.5 hours north of Minneapolis, St. Paul. This is what it looked like back in 1904. Back then, this would have been a long ways from anything, but at this point, people would arrive in town on a train, generally, and when they got to town, they would get around the same way people did for thousands of years. They would walk. And because they walked, the layout, the spacing between different types of uses, the way different buildings addressed each other, all of this was very, very similar to what you had seen across different cultures and different latitudes and different societies for thousands and thousands of years. Beginning in the early 1900s and then accelerating after World War II, we began to build our cities around a different transportation technology. We began to build and shape our cities around the automobile. We came up with different building styles, different building types, different ways of arranging them on a landscape and having them interrelate with each other. If you ask the average American today to explain this transition, it's likely that they're going to describe it in terms of progress. We used to be people who walked everywhere. We built cities around people who walked. We're now people who drive. We build cities around people who drive. Someday we will have jet cars, and we will build cities around people who drive jet cars. And someday we will teleport wherever we go, and our cities will look completely different than they do today. That's a very comforting and affirming narrative, because it describes where we're at right now in this arc of things always getting better. I want to put another idea into your head as a backdrop for the conversation that we're going to have tonight. When you look at these cities, understand that the knowledge and know-how on how to build this, at this point in time, had been building over thousands and thousands of years. Before you got to ancient Ur, before you got to ancient Rome, civilizations had tried and tried and tried a bunch of different things. What worked, they would expand on. What didn't work, they would throw out. And when I mean didn't work, I mean people died, right? Things didn't work out. It went horribly. And so by the time you get to this point, you have a style and an approach to development that had been honed and refined over thousands and thousands of years of trial and error experimentation. We knew how to build places that would survive in good times and bad times. in times of abundance and times of drought, in times of war and times of peace. We knew how to do this because we have been doing it for thousands and thousands of years along this framework. There was no manual that told you what to do. There was no underlying theory. We just built in this way because this is the way people had always built. When you get to this style of development, there's no corresponding track record of knowledge, right? We didn't try this out, in Kentucky to see if it would work, and if it worked, we'll bring it here to Indiana, right? We just started building this way all at once across this entire continent. We didn't develop our knowledge on how to do this by trial and error. We had some theories, some ideas. Some very intelligent, European intellectuals came up with the idea of zoning and the hierarchical road network, and a lot of the ways of financing things have been developed now as part of this whole experiment, this whole new way of doing things. It's important that we understand and acknowledge that we are living in a very early phase of what is one of humanity's greatest experiments. One of our greatest social, cultural, political experiments, but also a huge financial experiment. No one has ever built a continent the way we have built ours. And we've been doing it in a very short period of time. What we're going to talk about today are some of the implications of that development pattern that weren't apparent to us when we started this experiment a couple generations ago. If we look today at the way we build our communities and the way we finance that building, there's three primary mechanisms that we use. The first is transfer payments between governments. This is the idea that the federal state government, as our partners in creating growth and development and jobs, make investments in our community through grants, through subsidies, through low interest loans, through tax systems, whatever. The second is through transportation spending. This is the idea that we're going to collectively use our gas tax dollars, maybe add some additional revenue to that, and use that money to make transportation investments that will create growth in our local communities. Frontage roads, interchanges, traffic signals. These things create a platform for growth that we experience locally. The third is debt. And while public debt is an important part of the conversation, an even more important part is private sector debt. The ability of businesses and individuals to acquire, get a loan, have that loan sold off onto a secondary market, securitized, bought up by pension funds around the world. This has created an enormous amount of liquidity in our system, the ability to borrow in order to build. These mechanisms have allowed us to, at the local level, create growth, which of course is a good thing because as local governments, as local taxpayers, the growth helps us get the revenue we need to be able to do the things we want to do. This is, in a sense, city administration 101. There's some really powerful incentives at play here, and it's important that we recognize them. When we build in this way, our initial cost as local taxpayers is generally pretty nominal. When the federal government comes in with a program, when the state comes in with a grant, when the DOT comes in with a project, when the private sector comes in with some finance capital, as local taxpayers, we may have a small match, we may have some staff time, we may want to upsize some pipe or something, but generally, as an overall part of that total transaction, our share is pretty nominal. The benefit that we get is substantial. We have all this new tax base now, all this new revenue coming in. The catch is that as part of this transaction, we agree to take over and maintain and service this new growth forever. We agree that we will be responsible for fixing the roads and the streets and the sidewalks and the curbs, the pipes, the pumps, the valves, the meters. We'll provide police protection, fire protection, and all the services that would be needed. We are, in a sense, exchanging a short-term cash advantage for a long-term liability. If you think that through over the long term, if you say, we want to be around as long as ancient Ur, we want to be around as long as ancient Rome, we plan to have a civilization that's going to last beyond one generation or two generations, long, long into the future, there's only one or two ways that this strategy makes any sense. Either the growth is going to continue at ever-accelerating rates. In other words, we're always going to be able to generate that much more new growth that has very low cost for us but high returns. And we can use that money to make good on all the promises we've made in prior generations. Or the pattern of development, the way we're actually going about building our places, is going to generate for us more wealth and prosperity than it creates in liabilities. I think we all intuitively understand that the first is not true. It's not mathematically true, but we've now lived through some pretty great amounts of volatility. Like, we understand that that's not true. Unfortunately, the second is also not true. And this is where, for a short period of time, this presentation is going to get a little bit technical. I am an engineer. I have to do a little bit of technical stuff. I promise not to make it painful for you. One of the things that we did really early on at Strong Towns is reject the notion that something we call it's the system, dude. That if we just keep building this system, that all the parts come together and create this wonderful whole that is so much greater. And we said, you know, our cities are going broke across this country. They're having deep financial problems. Let's take a look at what's going on in the trenches of our development pattern. And so we hunted for places with the least amount of background noise possible, the least amount of complexity, where we could get a real good analysis of what was actually going on. This is one of the very first ones I did. This is a dead-end road cul-de-sac. These are residential properties, 2.5 acre lots. There's no through traffic, there's no commercial traffic. That's what I mean by background noise. There's not a lot of stuff going on. The only people that use this roadway in any significant way are the people that live along it. This was built in the mid-1990s. It was originally a gravel road. The city wanted it paved. The city went out and paved it. The city paid half the cost. The property owners paid the other half. We asked the questions, all right, based on the taxes the city's collecting from the people who live within this development, the only people who really use it in any substantive way, how long is it going to take the city to recoup the money they just spent building it? The answer is 37 years. Now, the road's not going to last 37 years, but it's going to take the city that long just to recoup the money they put into it the first time. Of course, the second time, the third time, the fourth time, there's not going to be a local match. It's all city responsibility. This is a slightly more intense development. These are half-acre, three-quarter-acre lots. The ones on the west here are a little bit bigger, but you can see they have a limited amount of frontage. Again, this is a closed-loop system, dead-end cul-de-sac. These are all residential properties. There's no through traffic. There's no commercial traffic. The only people using this are the people that live there along it. This was built in the early 1980s. It had completely fallen apart. The city went out to fix it. The cost was $354,000. We asked the question, all right, based on the taxes the city is collecting from the people within this development, the only people who substantively use it, how long is it going to take the city to recoup what they just spent to fix it? The answer is 79 years. The road won't last anywhere near 79 years. So we asked the question, all right, if the city wanted to collect enough revenue from these property owners to have the money to fix the road, collect that between now and the time the road fell apart, what would that mean? It would mean an immediate 46% increase in taxes, with annual increases of 3% over inflation every year for the next 25 years, with all that money going just to maintain the roadway. Now, some places will say, okay, Chuck, we get it. We know we lose money on residential property. We make it up on commercial. Commercial is our cash cow. To which my initial response is always, all right, I don't know any corporation that loses money on 90% of what it does and tries to make it up in the last 10%. I don't know why an incorporated municipality would think that that was a good strategy. Nonetheless, we have this cultural notion that if we just get enough commercial property that we can make up for the fact that we lose money on residential. This is a commercial business park. This is the kind of thing that cities build all over the place, kind of the typical build it and they will come investment. This was built in the mid-1990s. It's got the wide commercial streets. It's got the sewer, water, storm sewer, everything that you would need. This was so successful, every single lot is now built out, that the city wanted to repeat it and build the exact same thing on property they own right next door. They actually owned this piece of property. They were just going to mirror this and build the exact same thing on the property right next door. We asked the question, all right, if we could build the exact same thing for the exact same price and get the exact same level of investment, would this be a good project for us? In today's dollars, it'd be $2.1 million to build this. We can look out and measure exactly how much tax base is out there. There's $6.6 million of tax base. Now pause here for a sec and understand. Of that $6.6 million, 4 of those lots are a church. I go to church. Church is an important part of community, but the church is not paying any taxes to the city. 2 of the lots belong to the school district. I went to public schools. I have 2 daughters that go to public school. Public school is a very important part of the community, but the school district is not paying any money to the city for their bus maintenance facility. One of the lots is a county maintenance garage. One of the lots is a city maintenance garage. Of the remaining lots, the ones that are theoretically private sector taxpayers, every single one was either sold for $1 and or given a long-term tax subsidy in order to attract that business to open up in this park. For the sake of our analysis, we assumed that this entire new business park would be built out within 12 months, that everyone that moved in would be a full private sector, tax-paying, non-subsidized entity, and that every single penny of revenue would go to retiring that debt. If that were the case, a wildly optimistic scenario, it would still take the city almost 3 decades, 29 years, just to break even. That's 29 years where everybody else's taxes would need to go up to pay to plow the snow off the roads, to mow the ditches, to provide police protection, fire protection, and everything else that would be needed. And that's in the most wildly optimistic of scenarios. I used to go through about a dozen of these, and people would start crying and make it stop. There's a bunch of case studies on our website. I'll give you that at the very end. If you're someone who wants more, there's a bunch of them on there. I found that I can make the point in 3 slides and then show you some charts. Again, I'm an engineer. I like charts. I know some people don't. I will walk you through these. They won't be painful. We have 4 charts in this presentation, and then we'll be done. So if you're not a chart person, hang with me. Let's say that a developer comes to town, says, I have a piece of property I'd like to build on. I will follow all of your rules. I'm not asking for any variances from your codes and regulations. I will build all the houses. I'll build all the commercial properties. I'm not asking for any subsidies. I will go out and build the roads and the streets and the curb and the sidewalk. I'll put in the pipes and the pumps and the valves and everything that's going to be needed to make this work. The only thing that I ask as a developer is that when I'm done with this, you, the city, you, the taxpayer, you, the public, take over the long-term maintenance responsibility of all this stuff I've built. What would we say? We say, fantastic, right? You are going to build everything. This costs us nothing. This is wonderful. But let's say in the back of our minds we had, this strong towns notion. We want to be good, prudent people. And so when this revenue comes in from this new development, we're going to take the portion that would normally be spent maintaining stuff around the city, and we're just going to set that aside. And every year when that money comes in, we're going to add to what we have, and we're going to allow it to grow. And then when we get out a generation from now, and we have to make good on that promise that we will maintain and fix everything when it goes bad, we'll have this pot of money to be able to do that with. This is what that looks like. In year 1, the development's brand new. Doesn't cost you anything. The developer's paid for everything. The money comes in, and you take that portion and you set it aside. In year 2, some more money comes in. You add to what you had in year 1. In year 3, you add to what you had in year 2, and on and on and on. And every year, you're adding more and more money. A 5-year-old street doesn't cost you anything. A 10-year-old pipe isn't costing you anything, right? These are all costs that someone else, but it's nothing coming out of your pocket. But when you get to, in this example, year 25, and you have to make good on that promise you made back in year 1, you've got to actually fix something. What you find is that the cumulative amount of revenue is insufficient. And from a cash flow standpoint, you run far into the negative. We kind of intuitively understand this, right? This is why people smoke, right? This is why people drink Mountain Dew, right? We like it today, and the pain is going to come a long ways into the future. We don't account for this. All right. Let's say that our developer comes back a couple years later and says, that development works so well for me, works so well for you. I would like to do a similar size development. And in fact, every other year from this point forward, a developer walks in the door with a similar size proposal. In other words, this is the ideal condition for any city. Nice, steady, continuous growth. And we take that new revenue coming in, we set that portion aside that would normally get spent maintaining stuff around the city. We allow it to accumulate. This is what that looks like. In year one, you have your first development that starts to pay in. It grows over time. In year 3, you add a second. In year 5, you add a third. Year 7, year 9. And you can see that not only is each development just adding revenue with no cost, but you're having growth upon growth upon growth. And so your revenue actually starts to accelerate upwards. Your amount of cash you have goes way, way up. And when you have to make good in year 25 on that promise you made way back in year 1, you've got to spend a little bit of money, but it's not a big deal, right? You've had all this growth. The growth creates what we call the illusion of prosperity. Because as we all intuitively understand, if you lose money on every transaction, you don't make it up in volume. If every project costs you more over the long term than you're getting back for it, the further you go out into the time horizon, the more downward pressure there is on your budget. This is why when we travel across the country and we see cities filled with bright, intelligent people, following all the rules, doing all the things the way they're supposed to do, yet their cities are still starved for cash. Their cities are still going broke. Their cities still have way more things to do than they have wealth to do it. And they say, why? Why is this? It's not because we're dumb. It's not because we're lazy. It's because this experiment is not working. Now, you can look at this and say, all right, Chuck, well, we started this whole conversation saying this experiment has been going on for, 60, 70 years. We started this post-World War II, right? We should have gone broke a long, long time ago. How do we get this far? And that's where I'm going to give you our last graph. This is a graph of debt. Everybody in this room is familiar with the conversation that we're having nationally about our national debt, right? Our national debt is an enormous sum of money, $20+ trillion, unfathomable numbers. I've had 7 quarters of calculus. I'm not going to pretend that I can grasp what $1 trillion is, let alone 20 trillion. I'd like to point out, you guys had the weekly reader when you were in school. We had the weekly reader. When I was in 4th grade, the weekly reader had this little side box that said, if you took the national debt, converted it into dollar bills, and stacked them on top of each other, it would go to the moon and back 23 times. As if, replacing one abstract concept with another abstract concept would make everything crystal clear for a 4th grader, right? These are enormous sums of money. In this chart here, the bottom line, the blue one, represents the growth in our federal debt. The black one represents the growth in our GDP. This green one, the one that soars up like that, that's our private sector debt. That's debt that we all share. That's home mortgages, commercial real estate loans, auto loans, credit cards, margin interest accounts, student loans, private sector debt. The way we financed the first generation of this experiment, this new way of building, this new way of creating growth and jobs and prosperity, was to use our savings and to reinvest that illusion of wealth back into creating more growth. When that became insufficient to keep everything going, when the economy started to bog down, when our places started to choke on liabilities, think mid-1970s, early 1980s, what did we do? We shifted from an economy based on growth through savings and investment to an economy based on growth through debt accumulation. And growth through debt accumulation became such an important part of our economy that as we entered into the 3rd life cycle, the 3rd generation of doing this, we actually allowed our financing mechanisms to become predatory. We needed the growth so badly that we allowed our financial institutions to prey on our neighbors. You don't need a down payment. You don't need to show you can make a payment. You don't even need to have a job. We needed the growth so bad. Our ability to continue this experiment by having the private sector take on accelerating levels of growth, of debt, is just simply not there. Obviously, there's some huge implications to all of this. The mechanisms of growth we become accustomed to are waning. The federal government, the state government are vastly overcommitted. Vastly overcommitted. The notion that they are going to have the money to come and bail out every single city that runs into financial difficulty is just not a reality, let alone help us create more and more growth at the local level. The DOTs across this country, from the Federal Department of Transportation down to every state, are functionally insolvent, having more miles of roadway under obligation to maintain than they can possibly obtain in revenue streams. The idea that the DOTs are going to be able to come in and make transformative investments in our communities that will create growth the way they did over the last 60 years is just not a reality. We are going to struggle to maintain what we have. The private sector is tapped out. Our ability to take on accelerating levels of debt is not there. The generation today that is supposed to be buying the homes of the boomers who are moving on are coming out of school with massive levels of debt. What this means is that our local governments are going to be forced to absorb the costs of their own development pattern. If we want that road fixed, we're going to have to pay for it. If we want that pipe repaired, that's going to come from us. If we want that new museum or that performing arts center or that stadium, we're going to have to find a way to do that with our own local resources. This can't be done in the current pattern of development without some incredibly large tax increases and or some devastatingly large cuts in services. Now, we weren't invited to come here and tell you what you already know, right? Everybody in the room knows, this is the debate we're having at every level of government across this country. How big is the tax increase going to be? Who's going to pay for it? How deep is the service cut going to be? And where is it going to be felt? It is critical that tonight we see the third variable in that sentence, the third variable being the current pattern of development. As long as we continue to build in a style that is functionally insolvent, there is no way that our cities are going to avoid becoming insolvent. As long as we continue to build in a pattern and an approach that gives us the illusion of wealth today in exchange for these enormous long-term liabilities, there's no way that our cities are going to avoid bankruptcy, default. Whether that is a hard default, like we see in places like Detroit and Stockton and San Bernardino, or whether it's a soft default, like we see in cities around the country, where they're laying off police, firefighters, they're not maintaining parks, they're letting streets go. We have to start having a conversation about the financial productivity of the way we are building our places. So what do we do? About 3 years ago, we got invited to do a series of talks throughout California. And this presentation was kind of in its early phase, and I would go through and we would spend half the time talking about the problem, and then we switched to half the time talking about all the things that we should be doing differently. And I would get to the end, and the first question every single time someone would stand up and say, "Chuck, I'm really angry with you. You've come here and scared the heck out of us. You told us the sky is falling, but you didn't give us the solution. What is the solution to these problems?" And it took me a while to understand what was being asked. This was very frustrating because I thought, I'm talking about the things that we should be doing. But what was being asked was something a little bit different than that. What I was being asked was, what's the solution? But what the question really was this: what can someone else change about what they're doing so that I don't have to change anything about what I'm doing? I don't know of any such solution. And I think as a society, we've kind of become accustomed to those kind of solutions being put forward. What we have created for ourselves with this experiment is a very complex set of problems. And when you face a very complex set of problems at the local level and you lack the resources to come up with a comprehensive solution, what you need to do is say, how do we respond to this in a rational way? And so at Strong Towns, we've started to talk about rational responses. What do thoughtful people working in a community, rolling up their sleeves, do to approach this myriad set of complex problems? When we talk about rational responses, I like to go back and start with this photo here. Again, this is my hometown back in 1904. I live 2.5 hours north of Minneapolis, St. Paul today. This would have been the middle of nowhere back then. Right? Multiple days' journey from anything that we would label civilization. When I look at this photo, I was stunned the first time I saw it. You know, the engineer in me, the planner in me, looks at this and says, wow, look at the way the buildings line up just perfectly. Look at the way they frame the public realm at just the right classical ratios. The buildings themselves have great symmetry. They front the public realm in just a brilliant way. There's great segmentation of the space here. This is a beautiful, beautiful street. We would kill to have a street like this today. Let me ask you a few questions about these people. How thick was their zoning code? How many boards and committees and commissions did they have to go to get an approval to build something? How much tax subsidy did they give out? How many engineers and planners and economic development advisors did they have on staff? How many federal grants did they get? How many state grants did they get? We can go through the litany of things that we have convinced ourselves are absolutely critical for us to be successful building great quality places. They had none of them, zero. Yet look what they built. Look what they built. These were a bunch of illiterate lumberjacks in the middle of nowhere. They didn't even have 30-year mortgages. How did they know how to do this? It's really, really simple. They looked around at what they had at hand, and they used that to build what they knew worked. They copied what they understood and knew worked. After 60 years of engineers and planners and all these professional advisors telling cities how to create growth and wealth and prosperity, after all the rules and regulations that have been put in place, after all the grants and the subsidies and the programs, this exact same street now today looks like this. It's a wasteland of parking and half-occupied buildings. And if you want to understand in one snapshot why our cities are going broke, understand that there's $500,000 of public infrastructure in that little stretch of street right there. Where's the tax base to maintain that? Where's the wealth being produced that is going to offset the costs of keeping that stuff there? I was giving a lecture at a university in Boise, Idaho, and when I showed this picture, a student raised their hand and said, Chuck, I'm from Costa Rica. Costa Rica is a very poor country. We can't afford to build the way that you do here in America. When we build, we have to build one block at a time. And before we build the next block, we have to make sure that the block we just built has everything filled in. Otherwise, we won't be able to afford it. We're a very poor country. We can't afford to build this way. We're a very poor country now, too. And for a while, that illusion of prosperity made us think that this didn't matter, that we could afford to build this way, and you didn't have to do the math. You didn't have to keep score. You didn't have to ask any tough questions. We're now a poor country. We have to start asking a different set of questions about our places. So, what are these questions? And I want to start with the tip of the spear. Build It and They Will Come is a fantastic movie plot. It literally has everything, right? Baseball, Iowa, cornfields. It's perfect. It is a horrible economic development strategy. We are in what we call the desperation phase of this suburban experiment. And during this desperation phase, we're doing things that even a generation ago, people running city governments would be appalled at. We are now expected to be the dumb money at the card table, the ones who, gets the game going by seeding the pot, right? If we want to have that business come to town, we got to be shovel ready. We got to have the infrastructure out there in place so that if they show up tomorrow, we're ready to go. We got to give out the subsidies if they can't make it. We got to be there to give the loan guarantees and bankroll everything. It's our responsibility now as local governments to create all this growth and wealth and make it happen. And that's just the ante to get in the game. This isn't how cities build wealth. This isn't how cities have ever built wealth. Let me show you how cities build wealth. Do any of you recognize this street here? Take a close look. Does it ring a bell to any of you? This is my hometown of Brainerd, Minnesota, back in 1870. 30 years later, this street, this exact same street, would become this street here in 30 years. Take a look at that. I guarantee you that if we went back in the museum here in Indianapolis to find the earliest photos of this city, they would look just like that, wouldn't they? And if we went back and looked at the early photos of Chicago, Dallas, San Francisco, Manhattan, they would all look just like this. In fact, you can go to any city that was started prior to this new experimental way of building, whether it be Rome or Shanghai or Cairo or London, and you'll see that they started exactly like this. You see Romulus and Remus here, right? Little pop-up shacks. In this continent here, we built thousands of places like this. And for a variety of reasons, reasons that defy our ability to predict or project or even understand after the fact, a lot of these places failed. It didn't work out. It was the wrong people in the wrong place at the wrong time. All those complex variables didn't come together. What happened when a place like this failed? Did we have to have an emergency session of Congress to allocate trillions of dollars to Wall Street banks? Did your pension fund drop by 25%? Did unemployment skyrocket? No. What happened? A few people lost a little bit of money. They would salvage what they could and they would move on to the next city. These were small little bets. For a variety of reasons, reasons that defy our ability to predict or project or even fully understand after the fact, all those complex variables came together to have the right people in the right place at the right time. A lot of these places were successful. And when they were successful, something magical would happen. They would start to grow. They would start to grow in a time-tested way. They would grow incrementally up, incrementally out, and become incrementally more intense. And so after 30 years, this street would become this street. And as this city continued to experience prosperity, it would grow incrementally up, incrementally out, and become incrementally more intense to the point where after another 40 years, these 2- and 3-story wood structures would now be buildings made of granite, marble, and brick. We don't build wealth by going to the casino and putting it all in red. The way we build wealth is by making modest investments over a broad area, over a long period of time. Let me show you how powerful this style of development is. These are 2 identical blocks in my hometown. The one on the left we've labeled Old and Blighted. That's a label that the city's comprehensive plan gives it. The one on the right is labeled Shiny and New. The one on the right used to look like the one on the left, but it's since been redeveloped. If you look at these 2 lots, or these 2 areas, you'll see they're the exact same size. They're on the exact same thoroughfare. They're adjacent to the exact same neighborhood. They have the exact same amount of public infrastructure. Everything about them is identical, except for the style of development that's on them. That Old and Blighted block looks like this. If you think of my city growing incrementally up and becoming incrementally more intense, at the same time that it was growing incrementally out, this was the next increment of out in the 1920s. So in the 1920s, these 3 blocks were the edge of town. And this was the cheapest investment that you could reasonably do and have a commercial property. Had that growth pattern continued, you would have seen these grow up, become more intense, but what happened? You had the Great Depression, you had World War II, then you had a completely different style of development, and we just skipped right over these places and started building out on the edge of town. These blocks have stagnated for 90 years. The city labeled them blighted and said we want to have them torn down and get something new built in. 2 blocks over from this one, they were able to accomplish that, and now we have the drive-through taco joint. Everybody was thrilled with this transaction. We got rid of blight. We have this brand new building. It fits all of our ordinances and all of our codes. The biking people were happy because they got a sidewalk put in. The sidewalk ends right there, but it goes, right there. The environmental people were happy because they got green space now. They got them to put some native plants in the stormwater berm. The planner was happy because this sign meets the regulations. They got the right parking ratios. The floor to area ratios are all right. The engineer was happy because we got rid of the on-street parking and the cars can go through a little more flow, a little more quickly. Here's what nobody bothered to look at. That old and blighted block, that rundown, junky thing that we're trying to get rid of, has a total value of $1.1 million. That shiny and new block, same size area, same amount of public infrastructure, same everything, just a different style of development, has a total value of only $800,000. The city is actually getting 42% more taxes from that old, rundown, blighted block than they're getting from that shiny and new one. Understand what you're looking at. You're looking at the traditional style of development. The way we built places for thousands of years, small little incremental bets over time. You're looking at that in its infancy. After 90 years of neglect, and it still outperforms by a substantial margin the shiny and new thing in our experimental style. And we all know the trajectory of the taco joint, right? I mean, we all know 20 years from now, there'll be a new taco joint a mile up the road. This one will be turned into a used car lot. 10 years after that, it will be boarded up, and they'll be selling drugs out the back, and the city will be trying to get a grant to get it torn down and get something new built. We've all been around long enough to see how this happens. Let me show you something, too. When we did this analysis back in 2012, these were the numbers. I updated it 2 months ago for a thing we were doing. Here's how these have changed over the last 2 years. Traditional style of development. Not only is it really, really productive, but it holds its value over time. That's one of the features, right? We survive good times and bad times, plenty and drought, war and peace. The idea is to have an approach that withstands it all. That's what our ancestors, and I say that in the largest sense of the word, that's what our ancestors around the world got. They figured that out. They figured it out the hard way. Now, let me ask you something. Let's say we walk out of this building tonight and we understand that what America suffers from is not a lack of growth. We have had decades of the most robust growth that any civilization has ever experienced. What we lack is productive growth, growth that actually makes us wealthier over time. And so we realize we're broke, we don't have any money, but what we're going to do is say we're going to try to double the value of every property in the city within the next 10 years. We can't spend a lot of money, we can't throw money at this problem, we can't acquire land, but we're going to try to put the right small little nudges and incentives in place to nurture these properties so that over the next decade they double in value. Tell me some of the things you would do to improve the value of this old and blighted block right here. And go ahead and shout them out. What are some of the things you do? We could fix up the facades. A little bit of paint, a little bit of elbow grease on the facades would go a long ways. I think that's a really good one. You know what? The street has no trees. Trees are pretty darn cheap. We could even put some planters out and some benches. We could sweep the sidewalks. You know, little tiny things. Those are very modest investments. Go ahead, please.
Improve the school in the neighborhood.
How do you know there's a neighborhood school here? There's a neighborhood school up the street. No, we could, I think connecting the neighborhood, there's a whole lot of people in this neighborhood that are within walking distance, including the school, that don't walk here because there's no sidewalks once you get back off of here. It's a really nasty, dangerous place. We could make some modest improvements so people could walk. Please.
Get somebody in every single storefront doing something.
We could try to get, there's a couple empty storefronts today. We could make it a little bit easier for people to get in there.
Bike racks?
Bike racks? You know that we only have one bike rack in the entire city? So we could add some bike racks here. I think that would be a very low cost, easy thing to do. We could change our code so that you could actually legally build a second story and have it be a residence. There's all these, you get what we're doing here? We could go out on the street, grab 50 people at random and say, come up with 100 ideas of little things we could do. You got an hour, and within an hour they would walk out and have this big long list of things we could go out and try. What would you do to double the value of this property over the next decade? You can't buy it. You can't force the property owner to do anything they don't want to do. You can't throw money at the problem. What would you do? Frack? we have water. I have all these initials behind my name that are supposed to say that I know something. I have no clue of what you would do here. No idea whatsoever. Go ahead. You have an idea?
They've got a predictably slow day once a month, do a farmer's market.
You can try to get a farmer's market in the parking lot? Sure.
A portion of the parking lot.
Yeah. Here's the takeaway. We all intuitively know what to do here. This style of development has incredible financial upside and very limited downside. This style of development has a very limited upside and downside that can literally go negative. We see the same kind of thing on the edge of our community. This is the Fleet Farm building. Fleet Farm is a Midwestern big box stores. Do you have Fleet Farm in Indiana? No? Okay. I don't know how far over it came. Fleet Farm, you know Fleet Farm? Yeah. When you, walk in the door, think auto parts, animal feed, lumber, guns, camouflage lingerie. That's the basic product mix of your Mills Fleet Farm. Wildly successful in Minnesota, right? So successful that we doubled the size. This is the original size. This is new, it's doubled. There's an auto dealership here and a gas station. This is the most expensive piece of property in the entire Brainerd Lakes area. When the Mills people show up to a meeting, we just stop the meeting and ask them, what can we do for you, right? This is 20 acres. This is 20 acres of Brainerd's downtown. If you've seen the movie Fargo, you've seen a not so flattering but not so inaccurate picture of downtown Brainerd. Most of the second and third stories are unoccupied. A lot of the first stories are unoccupied. When I was in junior high, these two lots here burned down. It's now a parking lot. When I was in high school, that one burned down. It's now a parking lot. When I was in college, that one burned down. It's now a parking lot. Pretty much in my lifetime, the only major investments have been to wait for something to burn, clean up the rubble, and then pave it, right? Out on the edge of town at the Mills Fleet Farm property, we're getting $0.6 million per acre. It's a huge sum of money. Huge sum of money. Very valuable piece of property. But downtown, the same size area, just a different approach to development, has a value of $1.1 million per acre. Again, we're getting 78% more taxes from the downtown than we're getting out on the edge of the community. And this is the best. Let me ask you a question. How much did it cost us to get this? Well, the DOT spent almost $200 million on the bypass of the city. The city spent $30 million just to get sewer out to this point here. Tens of millions more for the water system. When I was an engineer, I actually designed that street back there. That was $2.5 million. This is a county road right here, multiple millions. The DOT just redid this intersection 2 summers ago, $500,000 just for that intersection. Those are enormous sums of money. How much did my generation spend to get this? We spent anything. That was wealth that my great-great-grandparents and their contemporaries built. slowly and incrementally over time and bequeathed to us as an endowment, as this wealth engine that would help us forever. And we have slowly milked it. Let me ask you a question about the occupancy of these buildings. Mills Fleet Farm will go out of business someday. Brainerd, Minnesota is the home of Mills Fleet Farm, so when I say that at home, it's heretical. But I point out, we don't have the Hudson Bay Company today. Every company has a life cycle. Mills Fleet Farm will someday go out of business. What happens to this building when Mills Fleet Farm goes out of business? I don't know. But whatever it is, it's not going to be worth as much as it is today, right? There are 134 different properties in the downtown. What happens when one of these goes out of business, loses a tenant, moves on, becomes an opportunity for someone else, right? I have seen in my life buildings go from being a pizza place to a retail shop to an accountant's office. There's an incredible amount of flexibility and adaptability in this building style. In this style, you have a development pattern that is not very productive and incredibly fragile. In this style of development, we have an approach that is not only financially very, very productive, but is adaptable and resilient in a way that is just not captured in our current approach. A friend of mine named Joe Minicosi does these 3D models of value per acre in different cities, and I'm just going to take you through these real quick to show you that this is my hometown, 13,500, but he's done cities all over the country. This is Buffalo, New York, population 240,000. And guess where the downtown is? This is that traditional development style. This is what the wealth engine of the community is. We can go to a city like Williamsville, see the same exact thing. This one is population around 30,000. Same kind of thing. When you get into the downtown, when you get into that traditional development pattern, is where the store of wealth in the community is. Here's one, Crosby, Minnesota. This one's just up the street from where I work. We're doing a project there now. Their big goals are to get a new hotel on the edge of the community and try to attract a Walmart or some other type of big box store. Yet we showed them that, look, all your wealth is in your traditional neighborhoods. It's in your traditional downtown, in your traditional neighborhoods. And all that stuff you built on the edge has far, far less value at a much higher cost. These are two images out of North Carolina, a city called High Point. High Point just got a Kmart and a Walmart on a new interchange. They subsidized all this development. They spent tens of millions of dollars running sewer and water out to them. The Kmart has a value of $384,000 per acre. The Walmart, $967,000 per acre. These are huge sums of money until you start to look at the downtown. An old warehouse building that they converted into a supper club is sitting at $5 million an acre. And here's the kicker, Jimmy's Pizza. This looks like that old and blighted block that I showed you earlier, right? $3.4 million per acre. If you had an acre of land, or 20 acres of land, or 100 acres of land, what would you want to build? Would you want to build something that came in at $380,000 an acre, $1 million an acre? Or would you want to build something that was $3.5 million an acre? How easy is it to build this in comparison to this, right? How easy is it to do that? When we look around today and see our city struggling financially to make ends meet, see them looking for that next big investment that's going to make their place all that much more successful and all that much more prosperous, we've got to step back and understand that it isn't the big investment, it's the small investments that make the difference. This place is a dive, yet it is producing wealth, immense amount of wealth for the city. And if we look at Indianapolis here and all the parking lots and all the open spaces that are sitting out here, and we're waiting for the big transformative project to come in and invest millions and millions of dollars to make this place work and make it successful. We're waiting for the big tower to come in, or whatever it is. Literally, if we went out and started building incrementally again, we started with Jimmy's Pizza, we could make such good use of this property, make such good use of our investments. We could create so much wealth and opportunity in our communities. And let me just point out one last thing about Jimmy's Pizza. Who owns this? Who owns these buildings? It's not one of us. Who owns Jimmy's Pizza? Jimmy, right? Jimmy. There's something really powerful in that observation. If we're going to do the big project, we have to be disciplined enough to ask a more sophisticated set of questions than we ask today. Today, when we do projects, we largely go out and make a case something like this. We say, we're going to spend $1 million. It's going to create jobs. It's going to create growth. And there's going to be $4 million of investment that happens as a result. This is the kind of thing you see in federal projects and state projects that come in with this kind of math. And this sounds really good, right? We spend $1 million and we get $4 million. We just like printing money, right? Until you ask yourself, where's that $1 million come from? Well, of course, that $1 million is taxpayer money that we're spending. Where's that $4 million going? Well, that's money that the private sector is spending. Now, I'm all for the private sector, and I think the private sector needs to do more. So don't misunderstand this as being against private sector. We need more and more private sector involvement. But if we're a government making an investment, this is not a math equation that works for us. If we're a government making an investment, we have to ask a more sophisticated question. We have to say, how much of this actually comes back around here to fund this again? Because if we want to be around generation after generation after generation to do this over and over and over and create wealth in our communities, our return on investment is not this, it is this. We never ask this question. We never sit down and analyze this. It is not part of any conversation we ever have. When we go to do a project, we have a very clear approach that we use. We say, all right, we got this thing we want to build. How much money can we get from the federal government? How much money can we get from the state? How much money do we need the private sector to kick in? And then what's our match? What's the amount that we have to kick in? And I'm telling you, as an engineer, I would interview for projects, and we would go in. Never did they ask me, Chuck, you're an engineer. How do you properly size a pump? What's the proper grade of bituminous to use in this type of application? Nobody cared. I could have been the most incompetent engineer in the world. Nobody cared. What do they care about? What's your history working with this grant organization? What's your history with this funding thing? Do you know how to apply for and do the proper loan programs to get this thing funded? All people were worried about is how do we pay for this stuff? What are we missing here? We're missing what happens the second time around. Because there is no federal program to help you fix that 30 feet of pipe that is settled. There is no state program to help you with that 20 feet of sidewalk that's cracked up. The private sector is not standing there with their wallet open saying, please charge us for that pump that just went out, right? They're saying, that's why I paid taxes for the last 30 years. So when we get to the second life cycle, what's left? It's just us. It's just Mayor Quimby. If we're making build it and they will come investments, saying we're going to put all this in and we're going to have all this growth, we better make sure that what we have here offsets all these income sources here, or else we're just making one generation investments. And we are dooming the people who come after us to liabilities that they cannot sustain. This is something we call a STROAD. A STROAD is a street road hybrid. It's the futon of transportation. If you think of a futon as being an uncomfortable couch that makes into an uncomfortable bed, a STROAD is a transportation investment that tries to do two things at the same time and does neither of them well. It tries to be both street and road. What is a road? A road is a replacement of the railroad, which is a road on rails. It gets you from one place to another very quickly. In a railroad, you would get on at one stop, you would get off on another stop, and there's a very high-speed connection between the two. There weren't frontage railroads, there weren't drive-through railroads. You got on, you got off. There's a very high-speed connection. And if you look at this, we have made the investments of a road here in an effort to try to move cars very quickly. We have put in 4 lanes. We have scaled them to highway size. This is so that you can get through here really quickly. We put in turn lanes to get the turning cars out of the way so that the through traffic can speed through as quickly as possible. Does anyone get to speed through here? No. The speed limits are set low. There's a traffic signal that makes you stop and wait. And so even though we've invested huge sums of money in moving traffic quickly, nobody gets to move quickly through here at all. What is a street? A street is and always has been a platform for creating wealth. And if you look at this, we've made the investments to make this a very wealth-creating kind of street. We have put in wide sidewalks, we put in decorative lights, they put up benches and planters and all kinds of things out here to try to attract businesses and make this a real wealth-generating kind of place. Is this place generating enough wealth? Not even close, right? Why? Because if you're going shopping here and you want to go shopping here, no one's going to walk across 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lanes. No one's going to walk down to the light, wait for it to turn, walk all the way across, and then walk back up. What are they going to do? They're going to get in their car, they're going to whip a U-turn, and they're going to come around and go in. And the businesses all know this and understand this, so what do? They put in parking lots, they put in drive-thrus, and you get a productivity more like that taco joint than that old and blighted block. It doesn't create enough wealth. We have to have a conversation from a transportation standpoint about identifying and eliminating stroads and converting our stroads into either high-speed, high-capacity roadways or really productive wealth-creating streets. Those are two different approaches. Today we merge them into one, but they are two very different approaches. When we're building roads, engineers completely understand how to do that. We are brilliant at it. An engineer will sit down and say, what's the design speed for this road? How much traffic am I expected to handle? Given this speed and this much traffic, what does the manual say is a safe road section? And then how much is it going to cost to build that? These are the engineer's value system. And they work perfectly well when we're connecting two productive places. But when we want to build great places, places that people want to be in, live in, shop in, hang out in, is a completely different set of values. We know and understand what those values are. And I'm going to demonstrate that to you tonight. Think about the place where you live. Think about the places you like to go. Think about the streets out in front of this building. When you think about those kind of streets, which of these four values becomes most important to you? Is it most important in those places that we move cars quickly, that we move a high volume of cars, that it is a place that is safe, or that it's being done in a cost-effective way? Which is most important to you? Is it speed, volume, safety, or cost? Let's try that again. Is it speed, volume, safety, or cost? Okay? Think of these same streets. Is it more important to you that we move cars quickly, that we move a high volume of cars, or that the investments we make are cost-effective? Is it speed, volume, or cost? Is it more important to move cars quickly or a high volume of cars? For you, would it be speed or volume? I can't do these on the fly. Do you see what we just did there? Everybody in this room understands the value set that needs to apply to our places to make them productive. We all intuitively know and grasp the types of things that we should be doing to make our places human scale, make them places we want to be in, want to live in. We all intuitively understand what they are. We need to stand up and demand that it be done this way. We can do this. Moses did not give us the AASHTO guide for building roads, right? We can think differently. We can do this. And it's going to take people like you in this room tonight demanding a different approach to make it happen. Here's our last concept. This comes out of Silicon Valley, but it really applies well to society at large. Innovation that happens from the top down tends to be orderly but dumb, while innovation that happens from the bottom up tends to be chaotic but smart. I'm going to show you what this means from a city standpoint. Oop, I lost my slide. Yeah, I did it too. Memphis, Tennessee. I have this slide that shows this pyramid. How many of you have been to Memphis? Memphis is a wonderful, wonderful city. Did you go just to Graceland, or did you do something else in Memphis? Just fun? Yeah. I really like Memphis a lot. I've had the good fortune to work with Memphis a number of times. Memphis is one of these places that shows up in the desperation statistics, along with Detroit, kind of 1, 2, 2, 1. Out-of-wedlock births, homicide rates, poverty rates. Memphis is struggling in many, many ways. But if you look at the history of Memphis in the suburban experiment, they have done everything the way they were supposed to do it. They ran highways through the middle of the city. They ripped down buildings to do it. They ripped down buildings to build parking lots. They ran sewer and water out into the hinterland on the edge of the community. They identified neighborhoods that they felt were substandard. They kicked the people out of those neighborhoods. They built things that they thought theoretically should be better. They subsidized businesses to move. They subsidized businesses to move there. They subsidized businesses to stay. They built a beltway. They continued to expand outward, ever outward, building more and more stuff. They eventually built a second beltway. And kind of the pinnacle of this top-down, orderly but dumb approach, they decided in the 80s that the way they were going to get prosperity, the thing that would make them a world-class successful city, is to have an NBA basketball team playing in a pyramid-shaped stadium. And that's what my photo is that you're not seeing right now. But imagine a pyramid-shaped stadium on the river. Now, they were able to attract a basketball team. The Memphis Grizzlies moved to Memphis. The city loves them. It's been a very successful thing for them. But the problem is that when the Memphis Grizzlies moved to Memphis, they didn't like the pyramid-shaped stadium. And so the city actually wound up building them another stadium a few blocks away. The pyramid has sat empty for over a decade. The city is in the process right now of giving the Bass Pro Company $35 million of tax subsidies in order to get them to convert this pyramid into a Bass Pro Shop. This is orderly but dumb. Let me show you chaotic but smart. This is also in Memphis, Tennessee. This is a little place called Broad Avenue. And Broad Avenue was a streetcar stop. In the 1950s, as the city was building highways, they ripped out the streetcar. They built a highway a block away from here, cutting the neighborhood in half. And this streetcar stop just died. The businesses that were along there went away. People moved out. And it just went bad. Some neighbors, fed up with the neglect, fed up with, the decline, decided to take matters into their own hands. They went and met with the landlords, and they arranged a project out here. They swept out the storefronts, they swept up the sidewalks, they painted some bike lanes, they painted some crosswalks. They brought in, just for one weekend, just to kind of demonstrate what was possible, they brought in a little coffee shop and a little ice cream shop and a taco joint. They had an art gallery. They had a bike shop. They had a little clothing retailer. They brought these people in just to kind of show what could happen. And at the end of their weekend, it was a pretty decent little place, right? They didn't go ask permission. They didn't go get Department of Health inspections. They figured that, we're starting this Friday. By the time someone got mad, we're going to be long gone anyway, so what the heck? Let's just go do it. I wasn't here for this project. By the way, this is Broad Avenue. The name they came up with this project was a new face for an old broad. Yeah. These are some really fun people. But I was out here 6 months after this project took place. Not only was every single storefront occupied, not only was every single second story occupied, but the landlord told me that he was able to charge twice the amount of rent for the last place that rented than he was for the first place. The city has since gone out and documented over 20 new businesses, 18 buildings that were on the blighted list that are now paying taxes again, over $24 million of new property value appreciation, something like 30 new jobs that have been created on these 2 blocks. What was the public investment? 0. Now, I don't know what Indianapolis would do. I don't know what the cities that you're from would do if you guys went out and did a project like this. But I can tell you what my hometown would do. My hometown, on Monday morning, you would have the engineer out there with the lawyer. They would be saying, that doesn't meet our guidelines for a crosswalk. We potentially have some liability here. Get the pressure washer out and get rid of all this stuff. And, while you're driving by Marohn's office, give him a citation, right? Memphis is desperate. And their desperation has made them really, really smart. The people in Memphis know and understand that they could have done all the public visioning sessions in the world. They could have had all the public outreach, all the surveys, all the sticker charts, all the things that you do to try to figure out what we should as a city be doing. And they never would have identified this as the high returning investment. They never would have identified this as the low-hanging fruit. But their residents did. Their residents did. And Memphis is desperate. And their desperation has made them smart. So what did Memphis do? Memphis went out with power washers, but they only went out with power washers after they had a plan to put this back permanently. Because Memphis said, you know what, we never would have identified this, but our residents did, and it's our job now to make sure it doesn't go backwards. Memphis doesn't have a ton of money to throw around, so what did they do when they went out? They said, we're out here with the paint trucks anyway, let's extend this a couple blocks in each direction and see if some of the love that's taking place here can kind of ooze into those surrounding neighborhoods. What do we have to lose? The paint's not going to cost us all that much. We're already here. If it doesn't work, we're not out anything. But if it does work, look what can happen. Memphis is in the process of redoing the highway that falls a block away from this. They stopped the project. And they said, wow, look what happened here. We need to fix these 2 blocks here and reconnect this neighborhood. Because this place is just starting to get on its feet. Let's nurture it along. And while we're nurturing along, maybe we can help this other neighborhood as well. There was a bike trail scheduled to go in 6 blocks from here. They stopped that project too, and they rerouted it through this neighborhood. We're starting to get success. Let's build on that success with the next increment that we can do. Memphis is desperate, and their desperation has made them smart. It's made them start to think incrementally and strategically, the way cities did hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago. Before we were rich, before we were affluent, before we had this illusion of wealth, we thought strategically. And that's what Memphis is doing. This is George. Back in the early days of Strong Towns, I would write this blog, and I would post something at 7 o'clock, and by 7:10, there'd be this comment from George. Chuck, I don't get it. Chuck, you're not making sense. Chuck, this isn't what I see in my city. Chuck, you said this 3 weeks ago, and now you're saying this, and those things don't go together. Explain yourself. And the guy's kind of a pain in the neck, He eventually got my email, started emailing me all the time with questions. We became Facebook friends, and so I'd be at my job working. This was all kind of a side thing I was doing. I'd be at my job working, and all these pop-up messages would keep coming up from George. After we started the Curbside Chat program, one of the first places that we went to was George's city of Mound, Minnesota. He invited us to come there. He said, I think I get what you're doing. I'd like you to come and talk to my community. He got a little thing together at a church. He invited all the city council members and all the planning commission members. None of them showed up. He invited his neighbors and people in his kind of social group, and they did show up. We had a nice little conversation, about 20 of us. George gave me a little tour of his community, and we went out to eat afterwards. And I remember thinking how much I liked this guy. He's a very nice guy, very friendly man. But I remember being very depressed too, thinking, okay, I left my job. I'm now running this nonprofit. I don't really know what I'm doing. I don't know where this is going. But this doesn't feel like the thing I should be doing with my time. George is a nice guy, but he runs a daycare out of his house. He's not on the city council. He's not in a position of power. He's not that influential. Doesn't have any money or resources. Am I wasting my time? And if this is what running a nonprofit is going to be, do I really want to be running a nonprofit? And I went home feeling a little bit depressed. I few weeks later, I got an email from George. Had a link to a video. It said, watch this. I clicked on it. Up popped this video. It was George at his city council meeting. George had taken my presentation and he had brought it to the city council that didn't show up to his meeting. And he had taken my slides and he had taken pictures of my city out and put pictures of his city in. And I watched him go through and present this. And here is a guy making the presentation that I never could have made. The one specifically about a place that he loved, that he cared about, that he thought was important. George had 2 kids that would walk to school every day. He got together with his neighbors and they figured, we can help each other out by walking our kids to school together. One person take a different day. Then they realized that, this walk is kind of nasty. We can improve this ourselves. They started planting bushes and shrubs. They started putting in their own crosswalks. Pretty soon they started meeting on Saturday mornings just to talk about things. They would go down to the coffee shop and have a little meeting to talk about stuff. George started a blog. They all started writing on it. They started talking about things that we could do differently in the community. When Walgreens came to town and wanted to rip down an historic building on the corner of their main street and put in a standard Walgreens set way back with a big parking lot, George and his crew came in and with scissors and crayon redesigned the layout of the building the way it should be to respect the heritage of the community and actually frame the main street the way it needed to be. And they won. We started to realize that we got it all wrong. At Strong Towns, we got it all wrong. It's not about the mayors and the city council members. It's not about better engineers and planners and economic development officials. What we really need are more Georges. We literally need more people who care about their places enough to show up and get involved and meet their neighbors and talk to them and ask the little questions. What can we do right now today in our neighborhoods to make them just a little bit better? We're so inspired by George. In my hometown, we actually started a group called A Better Brainerd. And we did things like throw a block party and have a scavenger hunt. We took that one neighborhood with the taco joint that the city had long neglected, that the city said, it's just a bunch of renters. Nobody in that neighborhood cares. It's just run down. And we embraced that neighborhood. We went out there and we had bike rides and did little experimental projects. We watched people and we observed people and we would talk to them out on the street. Why are you walking over here instead of over there? Well, it feels dangerous over there. This is the more direct route. We saw this, mom walking through the ditch with weeds up to her waist, pushing a stroller. Why are you walking through the ditch? Well, because I have to get to the grocery store. This is the only one that's close to me, and it doesn't feel safe to be up on the road, so I'm here in the ditch. We started to document these things. The city has a code that says you can't have a business in this neighborhood. So we went out and set up a business on the street for a day, just to show that no one would die and nothing bad would happen. We ran our business out there for a day. We sat out there with the desks and, folding chairs and all that. We started to do these things over the course of summer. We started to observe where people struggled in their neighborhoods. At the end of the summer, we came up with a report called Neighborhoods First. If you go to our website, it's right on the homepage. What we did is we went through and we identified 8 investments that the city could make in this neighborhood today that would directly impact people's lives to the positive. 8 small little investments. Put a bike lane in here. Put a crosswalk in here. Trim these trees over here. Plant a row of trees in this area here. Tiny little things. The city just finished up improving our 2-lane shortcut around the south side of town to a 4-lane shortcut. The cost for that was $9.2 million. The city is in the process of doing another project to extend sewer and water 1.5 miles out of town to build a new industrial park at the airport. Our existing industrial park is half empty, but this new one is supposed to create jobs and growth and prosperity. $7.2 million. The total cost of our 8 projects, $16,700. Nothing. Nothing. Small little bets. Incremental investments. If they don't work out, what happens? we're out $16,700. We've learned 8 things that are not going to amount to much. We go try 8 new things next year. But if they do work out, what do we know? We know now what to build upon. We know the types of investments to make. We can start incrementally improving every single neighborhood in town with the small little amount of resources that we have today. And here's the fantastic thing about it. When we make these small investments, not only are we kickstarting that incremental growth process that builds and creates wealth throughout our cities, but we're actually improving people's lives. We're actually impacting in a positive way, not a theoretical way, not a we'll build a new industrial park and it'll create jobs, and those jobs will create other spending and that will provide a job for you. But you say, you know what? We're going to help you get to the grocery store a little bit easier tomorrow. I went to the city engineer and I said, you've got a commercial area here, you've got a residential area here, I think you could use a sidewalk in between there. He said, why would you say that, Chuck? We have been so obsessed with getting the dollar out on the edge of the community that we literally have stepped right over the pennies and the nickels and the dimes that are sitting there in our neighborhoods waiting to be picked up. The small little investments that are so high returning financially, but also high returning in that chart that you showed at the beginning, the social, the cultural, the community part. These are the high returning investments. For 7 decades, we have been doing this experiment, and we literally need to now go back and invert our thinking and say, how do we start to make better use of all this stuff? How do we start to create that incremental development process again? And it's going to require a different mindset from us, a different mindset from local governments, a different mindset from the business community that is focused on small, incremental investments over a broad area over a long period of time. But the good news is, it's within our reach. We have the budget, we have the know-how to do this. It's not complicated. So let's finish with this. The current path that cities are on is not financially stable. Every city has adopted the same road standards, the same zoning ordinances, the same financing mechanisms. We are all fragile in the same way at the same time. Because of this, the future for most cities is not going to resemble the recent past. We're not going to repeat the last 60 years. The start conditions of this new economy is different than the start conditions of the post-World War II economy. We are in completely uncharted waters. You cannot just extrapolate out. It's going to be different. We don't know what that difference is going to be. I'm not going to stand up here and pretend I know what the future holds, but I am certain that the main determinant of prosperity is going to be the ability of local leaders to transform their communities. The places that have the dialogue internally, the places that unleash that incremental development pattern, the places that empower people to point them to the high return investments, those are going to be the places that are going to be in the best financial position to weather anything that comes at us in the future. I hope that is Indianapolis, and I think in talking to the people here tonight that are working on some of the great projects here, I'm very confident that you are moving in the right direction. We did put out a book about 2 years ago. There's some copies back there. Jim, our executive director, is around. If you want them, they're $10 each. We can now take credit cards even, so if you're interested in a book, they're back there. We have another book that is going to be just a Kindle single that is coming out on October 7th about transportation. And then I mentioned that I do have the book coming out again early next year. Our website is strongtowns.org. We're a membership-based organization, so if you are interested in what we do, go there. If you're interested in supporting what we do, we'd love to have you as a member and part of the team that we're putting together across this country to start building strong towns. Thank you so very much. I have to catch a flight tomorrow at noon, so I'm willing to take questions for as long as you want. No, if you guys want to, it would be nice if you have some things you want to chat about or questions or what have you. Let's do that for 10, 15 minutes, and then I literally, seriously will stay here until they kick us out, and then we can go chat on the curb if you still have things you want to talk about. Please.
So even though the old and blighted is shiny and you said that the old and blighted is constant,
Yeah.
after you showed us that, does it still say old and blighted?
Yeah, the question was, does it still say old and blighted in the comp plan? It just says blighted. So they didn't, I added the old. Yeah, it does. And the interesting thing, thanks so much. If you do have to go, you're not going to offend me. The interesting thing is, you're never a prophet in your own land. One of the things about doing this nonprofit, I started at home, right? And one of the reasons I started doing this is because I wasn't getting any traction in my own city. And I thought, am I crazy? Am I nuts? And as I started to talk to people outside of my own city, I started to find out that there were a lot of people struggling with this. The really cool thing is that it's now starting to circle around. And I'm actually now looked at as enough of an expert because I'm outside the community working that they're actually starting to listen to me a little bit more back home, which is invigorating. Please.
When you use the numbers and you're comparing the value, is that, so the little Jimmy's Pizza,
Yeah.
you had $1 billion per acre. Is that the assessed value or appraised value of if you were to buy that land or that building versus, so when you're saying...
Okay, those numbers come from the tax rolls. So those are actually the assessed value. That's the value that the assessor applies. That wouldn't be the market value. The market value would be different. And understand too, Jimmy's Pizza, the key insight on Jimmy's Pizza, the Kmart that was $350,000 an acre takes up like 40 acres. It's surrounded with pipes, surrounded with roads, surrounded with all this stuff. Jimmy's Pizza is on like 1/10 of an acre. It is a little tiny thing. But if you built an acre of Jimmy's Pizza, you would have an enormous amount of wealth.
So it's assessed value.
It's assessed value. Yep. Please.
The public loves Mills Fleet Farm and Walmart, and if you want to have them in your communities,
Right.
you've got to do and make the kind of land and infrastructure available that they want. Otherwise, they'll go someplace else.
Right.
So how do you satisfy the desire of the public?
That's a great question. The public likes Mills Fleet Farm. How do we respond to that? It's really interesting. I kind of have two like parallel responses. First is that I always get asked to come to communities and speak when they're about to get a Walmart, and they want me to come in and some outside group and convince people not to build the Walmart. And I just say, I'm not interested in that because at this point it's too late in the conversation. If your city wants to go broke, or if the neighboring city wants to go broke, bringing in Walmart and bringing in Fleet Farm, to me, I'm like, okay, I wish you wouldn't do that, but I'm not going to go broke too, fighting you. I'm not going to get in that race to the bottom. And that means that there's a certain percent of the population that's not going to be interested in living in my city. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. I'm not trying to appeal to every single person out there. I'm not trying to attract every single demographic. What I'm trying to do in my city is have a real healthy portfolio of private investment and the public buying into it. And if that means that I don't make an investment in a Walmart or a Mills Fleet Farm, and I lose out on that to the neighboring community, and that brings someone else to that neighboring community, then so be it. The other part of this that's important, though, is to understand the small incremental ways in which we actually make it easier for Mills Fleet Farm to operate in our communities. I look at like my hometown. We have ripped out all the sidewalks and widened out all the streets in the old traditional grid. This is like the walkable part of town. So all of a sudden, if I want to go 4 blocks to the downtown, it's a horrible walk. I didn't do it with my kids. You'll get in my car and drive to downtown. Well, as soon as I'm in my car, what happens? It's just as easy to go out to the edge of town because all the roads are all wide getting out there. Why would I go downtown when I can just go to the edge of town? So by starting to reinforce the local development pattern, what you're going to do is not necessarily create those people who say, well, I want to live out on the edge with a 3-car garage and drive to Walmart. Okay, you go be insolvent somewhere else. What we're going to do is say, all right, there's a whole demographic of people that want to live in this community, be able to walk to a store, and we're going to make it as easy for them to do it. And by the way, that's going to be way cheaper, and it's going to improve their property values. Do you want to add something, Jim?
Yes, the second answer to that question. I'm from Chicago, and the area of Chicago west of downtown and south of downtown used to be pretty sad. West of downtown, Chicago was just called skateboard. All of the older factory buildings there have now been converted to residential buildings. It very much follows the old development model, just the following to different use. The value has grown immensely, and within the last, about 7 years ago, a multi-level Target opened up that was developed now. That's where the old police station used to be.
Well,
Walmart just opened about 4 blocks away from that.
Right.
And so, because there's such density and such strong market there,
right.
These companies that have been adding 4 acres, 6 acres of field of parking are actually adapting their development plans to be able to fit in and take advantage of these new dense markets.
What we're seeing, and I think there's 2 dimensions of this. What we're seeing right now is not only an inversion of the development pattern from a residential standpoint, but we're starting to see some of the businesses adapt to that. So McDonald's has the McCafe now that they're putting in the neighborhoods. Not only do you have Urban Outfitters now, but you have Walmart and Target trying to fit into smaller boutiques. The whole Apple Store concept is really based around, we're not going to be Best Buy, we're just going to be this little boutique. And Best Buy is actually starting now to modify and close their big box stores and open these smaller boutiques. I think that's interesting from a land use standpoint. I don't know as that changes some of the socioeconomic things that go along with that, because you're still buying from a business that, in a sense, in a mercantilist way, kind of sucks wealth out of the community. Over time, as transportation costs become more expensive, I think what we're going to see, like we're seeing with local ag already, is opportunities for local entrepreneurs to essentially replace those imports that are coming in with locally produced things. And that's when this whole game starts to get really exciting. Please.
Can't you fix a lot of this with tax policy that adequately taxes the cost of development? I mean, for their future.
Yeah, and let me repeat the question because I know they're recording this. So, all right. Couldn't we fix a lot of this with tax policy? I'm gonna hesitate. I'm gonna give you a hesitant yes. I'm gonna give you a hesitant yes. Oftentimes, I'm asked to come speak to places that have these really strong Tea Party groups, because the sense is, well, Chuck, you're a conservative. You can talk to these crazy people. And I'll go in and I'll do the curbside chat, and we'll walk out, and everybody from the left and everybody from the right is really happy with the message, says, yes, this is what we want to do. As soon as you get into the issue of taxes, though, everything gets kind of weirded out, because there's a certain vesting in the current approach and a certain power structure that goes with the current approach. Ideally, we would not have a property tax. Ideally, unless you're Istanbul, sitting in the crossroads of commerce, you would not have a local sales tax as a huge part of your budget, simply from the volatility. We would have some type of land tax system, and that land tax system would be directly related and proportional to the amount of public investment. So remember when I talked about the guy in Costa Rica where they said they have to build the entire block before they build the next? The way you would do that from a tax standpoint is say, we put the sewer and water in here. Now these properties are worth $1 million each, and this property without the sewer is not worth, is worth $100,000 each, and isn't going to have that worth until it gets the sewer and water. But when it gets it, we're going to jack the taxes way, way up. What it means is you're going to have to make pretty good use of that, because you're not going to sit there with idle ground and pay huge amounts of taxes. In Pennsylvania, they allow the land tax, and there's a really interesting article just this week about a city that has kind of been experimenting with it and some of the problems they've had. Because as soon as they start to do this, what you find out is that the used car lots, the parking lots, the businesses with the huge lots out front their taxes go up about 10 times, and everyone else's go down about 5 or 10%. Well, if your taxes go down 5 or 10%, you're smiling, right? But it's not like you're going to show up at City Hall and demand, a 12% cut. And you're not going to show up at City Hall and say, oh, I'm so proud of this 10% cut, you did a great job. But if your taxes go up 10 times, 20 times, like they do in a different tax system, what do? You show up at City Hall with your army of attorneys and you shout the thing down and you fund candidates who are going to do it differently. I think that if we had a dictatorial type system, we could institute some really bright tax policy that would start to correct some of this stuff. We live in this messy, messy democracy. And while I think tax policy can be a big part of it, I'm hesitant to say that if we just fix that, it would be the magic bullet that would take care of everything. Please.
Why do you see as the reason that we're still obsessed with giant mega projects, even as I would say that the tide's kind of turned on some of the suburban mega projects and it's renewed interest in like downtown Indianapolis, but it's still full of just all the new projects are mega apartment projects with big subsidies that you don't see, even though it's old form buildings around here, you don't see the incremental building.
I'll give you three reasons. First, we're not broke yet. Okay? So, and even in Detroit, they just had the shovel thing for the new Detroit Red Wings stadium. So even when you are broke, there's still certain, grandeur with doing that. But we still can get access to huge amounts of capital. And when you can do that, there's a certain inertia to reshaping the world with your vision. The other two are a little more insidious, though. The first one, and the one that I think is really difficult, is that that's the way city governments are set up. If city governments are set up right now to receive large sums of money and do large projects. They're not set up today to work in very small, messy increments at the local level. Remember I said innovation that happens from the top down is orderly but dumb, and innovation that happens from the bottom up is chaotic and smart. And we all hear that and we go, yes, I don't want dumb and I do want smart. Okay? Look at the other side of the equation. Do you want orderly or chaotic? There's a reason why we have a Department of Homeland Security, because chaos scares the heck out of us, right? It makes us like paranoid. We freak out with chaos. So what we're paying for is orderly. What we get is dumb. City governments are set up that way. And let me just give you one example. Part of the Better Brainer thing that we did this $10,000 challenge where we went out and we said, all right, we don't know the things that necessarily should be done in this neighborhood. What we're going to do is we're going to give 20 people $100 each to go out and do projects and see what they would do to make the neighborhood better with $100. And we're going to take the best 5 of those and we're going to give those people $400 each. We're going to have them go out and do projects. And then the best 2 will get $1,000 each, and then the best 1 will get $4,000. So the person who through 3 rounds showed that they could do this, they were really great at mobilizing resources, getting stuff done. We're going to give them $4,000 to do some type of neighborhood investment. I went and I first talked to my dad about this and told him about it. And his reaction was, that's stupid. Because you know what's going to happen, Chuck. Someone's going to take your $100 and they're going to go out and buy Christmas lights and hang them in their front yard and say, here's my project. And I said, well, okay, Dad, but they're not going to make it to round 2. And it only cost me $100 to figure out that they were an idiot and weren't going to come up with something good, right? Now, for me as a nonprofit, for me as a private sector person, if I throw away $100 figuring out that, this person doesn't have the $1 million idea, that's money well spent. But as soon as the government starts doing that, what's going to be on the front page of the paper? Your tax dollars just went to buy, this guy Christmas lights. We have a really hard time as a society embracing the chaotic side of chaotic but smart. And so what we do is we demand orderly. And because we demand orderly, our projects get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger as a way to combat the chaos. The third part of it, and that's the insidious part, that's the worst part. And the solution to that is we need to reorganize local government. Local government cannot be a hierarchical, siloed endeavor. It's got to be a very flat, very team-structured kind of thing. In Memphis, we're actually trying to institute geographic teams, get rid of the department structure, and have a geographic team of different expertises that work on a geographic area, bringing all these different expertises to play on projects. But the third part is insidious as well, and that's just the political component. If you get elected to office, you're expected to do something. And we still have not reached the point culturally where we're expecting people to do 50 small projects. We still tend to gravitate towards the one large project as like the marquee thing that the person accomplished. And I think that will change culturally as we change, but that's one of the things that drives the big project today as well. How about two more? Okay. One. Does the large project drive cost and corruption, or the small project? I think I can make the case both ways. What happens with the large top-down projects is that statistically, the cost overruns tend to be greater percentage-wise and also tend to be far more difficult to handle. You just need to go to Seattle today and look at the $25 million boring machine they have buried underneath their highway to see that when these huge projects go bad, they go really, really bad. Corrupt, I don't really know. It certainly makes the stakes a lot higher and makes the players a lot fewer. Now, the downside to chaotic but smart is, one of the reasons we have orderly but dumb and not chaotic but smart, which was the default, is because sometimes when you let people do what they want to do, sometimes when you give people the authority to do what they want to do locally, sometimes when you say, let's try a whole bunch of things, people do things that are really dumb and nasty and self-serving. Sometimes we say, you know what, if you go back in history, you look, you say, well, you know what, that person is a different race than me, they have to use a different door than I do. Those are the kind of things that happen when you get hyper local. The reason why we have the system we have is in reaction to that. I'm not suggesting that one or the other is a panacea, but we've gone really far in this direction. And in a sense, we need to start scaling some of that back to here so we can get some of the benefits of the orderly, of the chaotic but smart. The corruption thing is interesting because right now, and it goes with failure too, when you have corruption today or you have failure today, it's on a massive scale. I personally don't think that, I'm Minnesotan, so I'm kind of idealistic about this. But there's a part of me that says we're always going to have a certain level of corruption, a certain level of incompetence, a certain level. I would rather have my corruption small and discoverable than large and institutional. And that's a personal belief. Last question, anybody? Please.
You haven't talked much about zoning yet. Hasn't zoning played an awful large part in using our city?
Yeah, I haven't talked about zoning. Isn't that play a large part? There's no doubt about it. Zoning is one of those things that has essentially encrusted our current approach. Here's what I think will happen with zoning. Our cities are changing right now. They're changing dramatically, whether we want them to or not. Our development pattern is shifting radically, whether we want it to or not. Zoning is an obstacle for that. But if you look back in history, you see what happens to obstacles. And this is what I tell planners. Like, your job is going to become obsolete in a decade if you don't change. If we go back to 1943, and we pick any neighborhood in Indianapolis, and we go to the person living there, and we say, you know what, a decade from now, you are going to pick up and move to that cornfield out on the edge of town. That's where you're going to live. They would have said, you're crazy, you're nuts. I'm not going to do that. All my friends live in this neighborhood, my job is in this neighborhood, my church is in this neighborhood. I went to school in this neighborhood, my kids are going to school now in this neighborhood. We have deep ties here. There's no way I'm going to move. Yet what happened? A decade later, they picked up and moved out to the cornfield. Why? Because it seemed like a really smart thing to do. And staying behind seemed like a really dumb thing to do. Look at what happened to government during that transition. We saw that this was happening. We saw what people were demanding. And government shifted and changed and got behind that. We changed our way of financing, we changed our way of building, we changed our way of regulating. We essentially enabled that to go forward. Right now, our zoning is essentially set up to be a defense mechanism for NIMBYism and a way to kind of lock this current pattern into place. But as the demand in the marketplace shifts, and you can see it happening today, the two most mobile groups in this country, the millennials and the boomers, do not want 3-car suburban lots with 5 bedrooms and 4 bathrooms. They want walkable, urban type places. When you see that, what's going to happen is that government is going to adapt to that. And the planners and the zoners will either go away or they will change. There's models out there for them to adopt that can enable this. They're going to have to adopt them, or they're literally going to become irrelevant to the point where their laws might still be on the books, but nobody pays them any attention. So I think zoning is going to wither on the vine and just go away in the way we know it today. So we've talked about how much time do we put into trying to get rid of zoning, and we just said, you know what? There's other people working on that. It's going to go away of its own volition. So if you hate zoning, if you're a planner and you do zoning day in and day out, find another job. Start adapting. What I tell groups of planners is, if you're not adding value to your community, you're not going to have a job. If you're simply red tape in the bureaucracy, a hurdle that needs to be, crossed, eventually you're going to go away. Because the money's going to get tight, and they're going to look around and they're going to say, well, you're adding value, and you're adding value, and you're a pain in the neck. You're gone. All right.
Thank you guys very much.
Thank you.